Hiya. Okay, so we have made it to Unit 2 of Human Biology. Well done to those of you who managed to survive thus far. So Unit 2 is called Physiology and Health. It is kind of split into. The first half of it is going to be about reproduction in humans, and then the second part of it's going to be about cardiovascular disease, so heart health, general human health, that sort of thing. So we start on key area 1 with gamete production and fertilization. The first 4 key areas, I said, they're going to be reproductive devoted, and then towards the end of the key area we'll finish off with cardiovascular disease, a bit on diabetes, a bit on measuring the heart and how you actually do it, and if you're lucky you might get heart dissection in there as well. Depends on your teacher and also COVID circumstances, I think.
It's a nice unit, but it comes thick and fast and you feel like you're going to be a doctor after about 20 minutes in. This first key area is nice, and then suddenly it's here's a bazillion words, good luck, go doctor.
Yep, so things to stress again, vocabulary heavy as usual, as with all higher human stuff. So again, stick to your PLP, use your PLP to help guide your learning, particularly your key knowledge. And if you're off for any reason, then you should be consulting these videos, you should be looking at your PLP, and you should be looking at the Google Classroom to see what I've posted up to try and help you. Okay, so let's get started then. Key area 1 is gamete production and fertilization, even though you can't see it because we're in the way.
And then click.
Okay, there we go.
Okay. So in terms of what you needed to know at National 5, or what you learned about this in National 5, and to be honest, it's actually not much more in this key area. They're really similar. So first of all, you learned about haploid gametes, so the idea that the sperm and the egg are haploid, they are not diploid, and they are produced by the reproductive organs. The sperm is the male gamete, it's produced in the testes. The eggs, which we are now also going to call the ova, are the female gametes, and these are released by the ovary. When the sperm and the egg nuclei fuse, this is called fertilization. This means fertilization occurred, and this produces something called a zygote. And a zygote is the thing that starts to divide to form an embryo, which becomes a fetus, which becomes a baby, which becomes you.
Okay, so yeah, I'm going to try and highlight the differences between higher and National 5 as we go through. But gamete production in males, so we got sperm cells are the male gametes, as we should already know. They're produced in the male testes. They contain one set of DNA, which means they are haploid. Nothing new there. Still
23 chromosomes, 5. Not 23 pairs.
Now, an extra bit of detail, I don't think this really comes up in the exam, is sperm decide, are you going to have a female sex baby or a male sex baby? And the reason for that is they either contain an X or a Y chromosome. If you think about the idea that during gamete formation in meiosis, you've got to split your chromosomes down the middle in terms of their pairs, their homologous pairs. So you've got to split them up. One homologous pair that they have in them, in normal male sex people, is they have an X and a Y chromosome. Split that, you end up with an X and a Y. So the X goes into a sperm, the Y goes into a sperm. So it's exactly 50-50 ratio. So when Henry VIII was going around cutting heads of his wives off because they could not produce a male heir, he really should have been doing some serious internal reflection, because it was all 100% his fault. Okay.
But that is really useful to know for when it comes on to the inheritance stuff and family trees, knowing about XY and XX and where different traits go based on that. So that is something that is really crucial for a topic to come.
Okay, now we're going to go through the basic parts of male reproductive organs. Now, there's the parts you need to know on this diagram, and there are parts you do not need to know. If you need to know it, it has a red box around the outside. So things you need to know from sight is the testes, for one thing. You should be aware of that. Oh, by the way, in case you hadn't figured it out, this is a diagram of a penis twice. Once sort of face on, and the other kind of side on. Okay?
It can come up either way in your exam. And the reason we're also labelling the stuff that's not necessarily as important is that stuff can still come up. You will not be asked about it, but they might put it in just to
you need
test
to know
you,
to
just
ignore
to
it.
see what's there. Yeah. So look at it and think, yes, that's a part that I don't need to know. I'm going to move past it.
So you need to know the testes, you need to know the sperm duct. Now, the sperm duct is the channel that's going to carry the sperm.
Blue tube.
That's going to be relevant when we look at vasectomies as well. It's also known as the vas deferens, as its posh sciencey name. But sperm duct, like an air duct carries air, a sperm duct carries sperm. Okay, the seminal vesicle. So that's that little blob that is sticking out there. You can also, Yeah,
it's vesicle.
Is it vesicle? I don't know. Have I been saying it wrong my whole life?
I think so.
Very
I'm
possible,
gonna say
like
you are.
apoptosis.
Yeah.
Okay, right. So the seminal vesicle, I'm going to keep going with this because that's how I'm familiar talking about it. It's got a very important function. It's just a tiny little nodule. You can also find it on the second diagram. I don't know if my mouse pointer can be seen or not. I don't think it can, but it can be seen just under the orange blob. It just sticks out to the side very slightly. It's not the purple ball, it's something else. Okay, the purple ball is the prostate gland. Okay, so the prostate gland again has a very important function. This prostate gland as well, as I'm pretty sure it must be full of rapidly dividing cells, because it tends to be areas that are full of rapidly dividing cells tend to get cancer. And if once you hit about 50 years old, if you're male, you will be asked to do regular prostate examinations, and that is to check your prostate to make sure that it's not going cancerous, just like how women have to go for cervical screening, smear test, and breast cancer screening. The idea is the prostate is one of these at-risk areas, and unfortunately the only way to examine it is a couple of fingers in the rectum to try and see how it feels. So enjoy that, boys. And the urethra. The urethra is the pee tube, okay? Now, the urethra in males is significantly longer than it is in females, and it's also kind of a benefit to males because it allows you, this is just extra, but essentially it allows a little cleaning mechanism post-sex and that sort of thing. Is the idea is during copulation, quite a lot of bacteria can get inside the urethra, and so having a wee immediately after it tends to clean it out.
Whereas UTIs.
Yeah, whereas females don't really have that advantage because their peeing apparatus and their reproductive apparatus are totally separate.
So the urethra, technically not the pee tube, it is the pee and the sperm tube, because they come out of the same place in males, whereas they don't in girls.
No. And it's also advantageous to males because they can kind of get a burning sensation when they pee to warn them about STIs and that sort of thing too. Whereas again, doesn't that really happen for girls. Now, extra bits that you don't need to know but must be aware of is the giant orange thing, hopefully you figured out, is the bladder. Okay, so that is where the pee is stored. Penis or erectile tissue, the idea is it's full of loads and loads of blood capillaries, which can this word will come later, but vasodilate or vasoconstrict depending on the needs at the time. So when they vasodilate, they can fill with blood, and that allows the erectile tissue to get stiffer and harder, which results in the erection. We've also got the scrotum, which is weird because it's kind of muscular bag as well. It has the ability to kind of contract and raise the testes inside the body.
If it's not the right temperature.
Well, that's it. It's sperm are very fussy when it comes to temperature. 37 degrees Celsius, too hot for sperm, really bad for them. Also what we find is males who have a lot of hot baths or sit with a laptop on their lap have reduced fertility because their sperm get overheated.
Same with phones and pockets and things, and phones and pockets and skinny jeans. Really, really bad for your testes and your sperm production.
This is all just extra, by the way. You just need to know where they are. I just like talking about this stuff for some reason. I'm weird. The head of the penis is at the top of the penis, and then there's also foreskin, which may be removed depending on religious /
medical
cultural
needs.
Medical needs, that kind of thing. Okay, so the ones again highlighted in red, you might get asked to name or identify. Anything not in red, ignore it. Okay, so all you need to know is that's not important. It's not something you'll get to name.
Okay, so in terms of the basic parts and their roles, first of all, the testes, you should already know this, they are the things that produce the sperm.
Sorry, the sperm duct carries sperm to the urethra.
The seminal vesicle, it produces the fluid to feed sperm and maintain viscosity of semen.
Do we know what the word viscosity means? Just to clarify, it means runniness.
Thickness.
So like treacle is super viscous, water is
not.
Very not viscous, okay? To try and give you an idea what viscosity means.
Thinness of a liquid.
Yeah. Okay, the prostate gland, it produces fluid to feed the sperm as well, and also to maintain the viscosity of semen. Think about it, if the semen's too runny, there's not going to be enough of a sugar concentration to feed the sperm. If it's too thick, they're not going to be able to swim anymore. Okay, so it is important to maintain this viscosity.
Like Goldilocks and the Three Bears.
And the millions of sperm.
Not too viscous, not too unviscous.
Yeah.
And the urethra, it carries the semen and the urine out of the body.
Okay, so those are the key roles of the things that you need to know. It's again quite basic. I know I've been going on for a little while, but it is quite basic. Okay, so extra bits about production of sperm. Inside the testes are long tubes called seminiferous tubules. Okay, so What we're looking at here on the diagram is one testicle that's essentially been sliced in half, and you're looking at it, it kind of looks like an orange, and said before, all those tubes that are curled up inside the testes are known as seminiferous tubules.
The little yellow ones.
Okay, and that is where sperm are produced. So if any question now asks you, where are sperm produced? In the testes, no good. It has to be in the seminiferous tubules is your first answer, and if you want to, shove in the testes in brackets, but main point is in the seminiferous tubules. Okay, there's a couple of other structures to know about that are around the seminiferous tubules, and also these diagrams are showing you the different ways that seminiferous tubules can appear. So this diagram here is showing a seminiferous tubule as if you cut it and look straight down the neck of it. So you can see the little sperm on the inside of it. You can see the little germline cells on the outside of it, remembering that key term, germline cells. And then outside the seminiferous tubule, you've got labeled a structure called the blood capillary. Now, the blood capillary is there to supply blood, which is supplying, normal stuff that's supplied by blood, i.e. glucose for respiration and oxygen for respiration. Okay, and that's going to provide enough ATP for sperm production. Sperm production needs quite a lot of energy. Okay, so you need the stuff to be able to supply that energy. There are also other cells that surround the seminiferous tubule. I'm going to bring our image down for a second. So the ones that are not red are called interstitial cells, and we're about to have a look at their role just now. Oh, there we go. Germline cells and newly produced sperm cells.
Okay, so the interstitial cells, these are really important because they are the things that produce testosterone, which obviously is the male hormone. It's not just found in males, it's found in females as well, but it's kind of the key hormone involved in male puberty and just male development, which we will touch on this more in the next key area, in a couple of key areas time. We'll talk a lot more about testosterone, but the idea is it is the interstitial cells that are responsible for producing testosterone and for the production of, what does that even say? And for
sperm
production
cells
of sperm
in
cells.
the seminiferous tubules.
I could not read that sentence there.
Yeah, no, it's a bit weird one, but the idea is testosterone has two roles. Number one is secondary sexual characteristics, and number two is helping to produce sperm in the seminiferous tubules.
I just lost it after the brackets. Apparently my brain couldn't read when it took a new line.
There is an unusual space there. I think it takes a new text box, and I think that cut it off for you. Poor dyslexic brain. Okay, so again, if we have a look at this diagram, another way that seminiferous tubules can be seen. So the seminiferous tubules are the purely round things that you can see inside there. If you look really closely, you can see some light grey structures in the middle that are sperm cells. Okay, around the outside of those is interstitial cells. Now, a good language point to be aware of is that word inter. Okay, inter means in between two things. Okay, now interstitial cells are talking about being the in-between cells. So they're not inside the seminiferous tubules, they're in between the seminiferous tubules. If you think about inter-specific competition, there I mentioned it from National 5, the idea that was in between two different species. International is talking about in between two different countries. So that inter word is actually a really handy one, just generally for biology.
Latin or Greek?
Not a clue. But the idea is that it's a generally handy thing to be aware of. Is inter means in between. Really what it's talking about is the interstitial fluid is what it's talking about. But we don't need to worry about that just yet. Do you want to head this one?
Yep, so in terms of the females, the gamete, which at Nat 5 we discussed was the egg, we are now no longer calling it the egg, we are upgrading it and calling it its proper name, which is the ova. So the ova are produced in the female ovaries, that's something you learned in Nat 5, and they still, like sperm, contain one set of DNA, so they are haploid, they contain 23 chromosomes only. Now, ova only have an X chromosome, whereas sperm had an X or a Y. Each ova is an X. That's it. There's no choice in it. It is only X because females are XX. And one ova is released once a month from puberty until menopause. This is what is a period. We are going to learn more about this in the next topic, that releasing of an egg to the point of menstruation and all the things that come with that.
We're looking at the hormones that control it. Okay, so female reproductive organs, again, I think the areas highlighted in red are relevant. You need to know far more of this. In fact, I think all of it. I think all of it is relevant, okay? So what we've got there is the ovary. So the ovary, you've got another one on the other side. And the idea is they're supposed to take turns in releasing the ova. It's supposed to be left, then right, then left, then right. So one each month. The idea is that it's quality over quantity with females. They tend to produce high quality eggs. They spend a whole month getting it ready and shoving it out into the oviduct. Also, multiple births for humans is a bad plan. We are terrible at childbirth, generally. We die more than any other animal on Earth in childbirth. So 2 offspring, double that risk, and then 3, just, into nightmare territory there.
Which is why we don't have like 8 or 9 things like dogs, who having 10 puppies, fine. Humans, not so much.
The issue is down to our heads. Our heads are far too big for our bodies. Okay. The oviduct is very important. So again, sperm duct carries sperm, oviduct carries ova. Okay.
Still not calling it fallopian tubes. It's the oviduct. Deal with it.
Just keep it all ov, like oviduct, ovary, and then ova. Is what we want to look at. Now, you must call it the uterus from now on, no womb, okay? So the uterus, that is the expandable area where the infant or the fetus is going to grow. The ova is labelled on there, okay? So again, we're referring to it as an ova. Now, the idea is if fertilisation wants to occur from National 5 in the oviduct, not in the uterus. If it happens in the uterus, it's too late, okay? Now, this is a new term that you do need to be familiar with. The uterus lining cannot be called the uterus lining anymore. You have to use this big fancy word, endometrium. Okay? Now, the idea is that lining builds up and breaks down every month. If there is a pregnancy, it stays built up, and the fertilized egg, the zygote, will implant into the endometrium and start to grow there. Okay? So, endometrium, very important term.
If it doesn't, the endometrial lining sheds. And that's your period. Fun.
The cervix is the entrance to the womb. It's mostly blocked by mucus, but I don't think you really need to know that part. But the idea is it's a very sort of small entrance to the womb. And then finally you've got the vagina, which is officially the site of copulation. So where sperm will be deposited in order to be as close as possible to try and get to the ova if they can.
To increase their chance of actually making it there before being killed by the hostile environment that is the uterus.
Not every species will do internal fertilization, so the idea of depositing sperm nearby, but you have to be a water-based animal for that to happen so that sperm can actually reach the ova that they're aiming for. Okay, so official higher sort of definitions of what we need to know there. The ovary is in charge of the maturation and release of ova.
The oviduct is just the site of fertilization.
The uterus is where the embryo or fetus is going to grow.
The endometrium is the lining of the uterus where embryos attach and where a placenta will form.
Okay, the cervix is the entrance to the uterus.
And the vagina is just the site of copulation.
Okay, so nice and easy there. Okay, now we're going to go into sort of, just like we did when we looked at the overall parts of the male and then we looked at testes in more detail, we now take the ovary and we'll look at slightly more detail there. Okay,
so in terms of the maturation of the ova, this is something that's important to know about. So in your ovary, there are thousands of immature ova. Although it's one that is released a month, there are thousands there. There are loads ready, and the thing that actually has to happen is the maturation of one. So one has to become mature for it to be released. So before an ova is actually released, it has to go through this process of being made ready, and it does so in this little structure called a follicle.
Okay, now you can kind of see the pictures of the follicle. What that picture is that it's a slice of an ovary, and the follicle is the bubble looking thing that's inside the ovary. Okay, so if we look at follicle formation, now don't worry too much about this just now because we will look at it in more detail in the hormonal control unit. But the idea is we start off at point number 1, we've got our immature ova, which is the tiny little pink blob. What will happen is it starts to grow and form the structure around the outside of it, which is the follicle. So the follicle starts to grow. We still got our little ova on the inside of that structure. Okay, as the follicle then grows and grows and grows, eventually it ruptures and is released from the ovary. And that rupturing, that bursting out and saying, hello world, that's called ovulation. Okay, now hopefully you've heard that term in your life of a woman is ovulating, i.e. she is able to get pregnant. What ovulation means is a mature egg has been released. It's in the oviduct, a mature ova has been released. It's in the oviduct and it's ready to be fertilized. Okay, now something to be worth aware of is the follicle after it's burst, much like a burst balloon, there's leftover bits of it. They are called the corpus luteum, and we will cover more about that later. It is
important.
Okay, so a little GIF showing ovulation there. So the idea is we start on the surface of the ovary, there's our egg, or ova, has been released, and that's getting wafted into
oviduct.
Oviduct, yep. Okay, so again, ovulation, and then wafted into the oviduct. Okay. So it's not as easy as just sperm being released.
Yeah, there is a small gap between the ovary and the oviduct. It's not like it's shot right into it. There is a bit of it has to go there. Like a lot of diagrams look like they're completely attached when they actually aren't. It's kind of ejected and then has to travel a tiny bit to get there, which for something that small is a huge bit it has to travel.
Okay, so
the pathway of the ova, again, you have to know this. Like with the sperm, you have to know the kind of the route that it follows along the sperm duct to get to the end where it will be ejaculated wherever it needs to go. The ova, similarly, you have to know the pathway of it to the point where it either meets the sperm, gets fertilized and becomes a zygote, or leaves through menstruation. So after ovulation, the ova is wafted, like we just said, into the oviduct. So it's kind of made to go into it. It's kind of fanned into it. I don't really know. Wafted is the appropriate word.
There's these tiny things called fimbriae, but you don't need to know about them.
Wafted is the best word. And then the walls of the oviduct contract. So like all your muscles, you'd say contract. So they contract behind it to push the ova towards the uterus. A bit like peristalsis, but with an ova and an oviduct instead of food in your gullet. So if the ova is fertilized, obviously if it meets the sperm within the oviduct, then it will become fertilized, a zygote will form, and that's when it can implant. And if it doesn't, it will just continue on its happy way through the uterus, and then that's when it will be released.
Okay, so fertilization, a reminder, it's the same as the National 5 definition. You need to make sure that you've got this idea of it's the mature ova and sperm nuclei fusing together. So it's not enough just to say egg and sperm or ova and sperm fuse together. Not enough. It's the two nuclei of each cell type fusing together. There we have fertilization to produce a diploid zygote. And again, this must happen before the ova reaches the uterus for a pregnancy in order to occur. Now, reasons why fertilization might fail, this is just for sort of general background things. So maybe the sperm reaches the egg too late, or the ova too late, so the ova's already arrived in the uterus.
Yeah, or a second sperm could enter the egg, and actually that causes the egg to then die. It has to be one sperm. As soon as it's more than one, that is bad, egg dies.
Sometimes a female's immune system is extremely good and efficient, and it can actually kill all of the sperm that are in the uterus, because of course she will have an immune system patrolling in there, and sperm are foreign to a woman's body, and so they might kill them all.
Okay. Sometimes it's just a hormonal imbalance in females. We're going to look lots about the hormones in the next couple of key areas, but if the hormone imbalance is not right, fertilization just might not happen.
It could be blocked oviducts. That's a relatively common cause of infertility. Is the idea is sometimes the oviduct walls can sort of collapse in on each other and kind of block themselves. They can be unblocked, or the female can go for IVF to try and hop over that little barrier.
Or another really, really common one, when it's actually the male's problem, is their sperm are too lazy or deformed, just not up to the job really. Can't swim far enough, can't reach the egg, and can't get there without dying.
Okay, so that was gamete production and fertilization. I'm just going to summarize the sort of very, very basics on the next slide.
So it was a whole key area in one video.
Yeah,
which is
it's
nice.
a long video, but it is one whole key area. Okay, so the idea is the male gamete is sperm. It's produced in the seminiferous tubule that's inside the testes, and the pathway that it would take is sperm duct being deposited into the vagina, and then it should swim up through the cervix into the uterus, and then into the oviduct.
Okay. For females, the main gamete is the ova. We're no longer calling it the egg. It is produced in a follicle in the ovary, and it has two choices of pathways depending on if fertilization occurs or not. So if there's no fertilization, it goes oviduct into uterus into the vagina. If fertilization has occurred in the oviduct, it would go oviduct, uterus, then it would implant in the endometrial layer, and baby would grow.
Okay, so this summary slide, it's skipped out a couple of things, but generally it's most of the stuff you need to know.
Yeah.
Really, I find that the next key area is going to make a lot more of this, make a bit more sense. It's going to have more detail in there. It'll really help you learn this stuff a lot better.
This is kind of just a gentle overview of the things to come.
It's a really, really gentle introduction, and then we hit you with seven different hormones, which is fun. So the next key area will be hormonal control. It is a big one. We'll divide it up into as many sections as we can to try and make them short, easily understandable sections. I understand this has been a bit of a long video, but you can see it's a tiny key area. It was worth just smishing it all together for that one. So we'll see you in the next one, hormonal control.
Enjoy it.
Yeah, have fun.